I tried to find the answer, and there was really no specific thing that we could hone in on that was an issue. Right?
Which is the most frustrating thing, I think, to go into a primary care office with these symptoms and know you don't feel your best, but then your labs look normal or there's no, real answer.
Exactly. And that's exactly what happened to me. Everything was within the quote normal range. Right. And so what do you do with that information? It's like, oh God, and I felt that the pain of that and the frustration of that from a patient's point of view, right? Which you and I have seen enough patients that's the story. And you're like, okay, let's figure out what's going on because the labs show me nothing, right? And so, from an Ayurvedic perspective, really what that came down to was that I was not living in harmony with the world around me. I had lost touch with the world I was living in.
Hello, and welcome to Pursuing Health. I'm Dr. Julie Fouché, family physician and former CrossFit Games athlete. Here, I bring you information and inspiration to help bridge the gap between fitness and medicine and support your journey toward your healthiest self. Thank you so much for joining me. Now let's get started with this week's episode.
Welcome back to Pursuing Health. I am very excited to be here today with Dr. Avanti Kumar-Singh. She is an MD who is internationally recognized in Ayurveda and integrative medicine. She's a certified yoga therapist. She's a former ER doctor. And I love how her approach brings together Western medicine with the ancient wisdom of Ayurveda from her South Asian lineage. Dr. Avanti is an author, a former co-lead facilitator at Northwestern Medicine's Osher Center for Integrative Health. She hosts the Healing Catalyst podcast, and she offers courses on integrative medicine. She's a sought-after speaker and advisor in the wellness community, sharing her knowledge with Fortune 500 companies, top academic institutions, and leading industry and medical conferences. So I am so excited to have you here today. Welcome, Dr. Avanti.
Thank you so much, Dr. Julie. I'm so excited to be here with you.
Awesome. And just before we started recording, I was telling you that I am very captivated by your personal story. And also, I'm very excited to bring Ayurveda to the podcast. It is not a topic we've dove into yet, but I've been feeling a pull myself to learn about it. And I'm just starting to dip my toe in, and your book was a great introduction. So I'm excited for the time we have today. And I thought to start with your personal story, maybe you could just lay some groundwork for us on kind of your upbringing and then what led you to a career in medicine and then as an ER doctor.
Yeah. So thank you. Absolutely. I would love to. So I grew up in Chicago. My parents are first generation, are immigrants from India. I'm first generation from India. And, I grew up with Ayurveda. It was just the way we lived our lives. It was part of everything that we did, from, the foods that we ate and the way that we sort of, connected with our community, the way that we lived in our home. I remember my mom would change the colors of the pillows and the different fabrics in the home, depending on the season, things like that. I grew up with Ayurveda. And so it was a medicine that was sort of just, I took for granted, quite honestly. And when I got to medical school, and I think I was so focused on becoming a Western trained doctor, I didn't really have an appreciation for the medicine that I grew up with. And really, I set my sights on Western medicine because I knew I wanted to go into a health profession. And really, the examples around me were all my aunties who were South Asian, who had come from India, and they were all doctors. The ones who worked outside of the home, they were physicians. And so I was like, oh, that's what I'm going to do. And so I sort of set my sights on medical school and never looked back. And it was when I got to medical school and into my training that I started to get sick. I had never had any health, issues till then. I was very lucky and blessed in that way. And even through college, I was really healthy. But it was when I got to my medical training that things kind of went upside down. You know this, you know how it is to be a medical student and a resident.
It's not the healthiest lifestyle.
No, it's not. And the hours that we worked and, all that kind of stuff. And I think what I realized is that I was not getting the answers from the medicine I was training in. I was trying to figure out what was going on with me. And the answer was always like, oh, you're under a lot of stress. You're working a lot of hours, you have two small kids, you're in medical school. all the things that would cause problems. Absolutely. That's not that it wasn't part of the issue. But the bigger thing is that I realized I wasn't living in harmony with nature at all. I was not doing any of the things that I grew up with because, I was also in emergency medicine. My schedule was upside down. I had small kids. I was eating on the run. All the things that are not good for your health, I was doing. Um, and I really started to look at what I had learned when I grew up. And I thought, I was so healthy for so many years. What happened? And it was really, I really honed in on the fact that I was doing nothing that I grew up with, all the practices that were so powerful that as I started to dive into the research, I was like, oh, well, everything that I was doing when I was growing up, we now have the data and the science to prove why it works. So that's really how I went back to the medicine I grew up with.
Wow, that has to have been such a light bulb moment for you, or such a full circle moment, to discover that. What were some of the Can you share any details on some of the symptoms that you were experiencing, and then how those might have been treated in a Western setting versus what you were able to do with your Ayurvedic wisdom?
Yeah, it was all the non-specific symptoms that so many of us, especially women who are in that time of life where you're doing multiple things, you have multiple roles and responsibilities, right? Whether it's caregiving at home, caregiving for elderly parents or other family members, having a job outside the home, whatever it is, there's so many things we're doing, right? So it was a lot of the non-specific symptoms. Stomach aches all the time, constipation, um, headaches, low energy, feeling like I couldn't remember things. That probably was just being in medical school. Um, but and a lot of pain. I had gained almost 20 extra pounds that I was carrying around, and I was on my feet all day. So I had plantar fasciitis in both feet. I had chronic low back pain, right? All of these sort of non-specific, you don't feel well, you're not sure what to do, right? And I thought, well, maybe it's my hormones. Maybe, I have a thyroid issue. Maybe I tried to find the answer. And there was really no specific thing that we could hone in on that was an issue,
Which
right?
is the most frustrating thing, I think, to go into a primary care office with these symptoms and know you don't feel your best, but then your labs look normal, or there's no, real answer as far as how to
Exactly.
address them other than maybe a medication that might mask the symptoms.
Exactly. And that's exactly what happened to me. Everything was within the quote normal range. Right. And so what do you do with that information? It's like, oh God, and I felt that the pain of that and the frustration of that from a patient's point of view, right? Which you and I have seen enough patients that that's the story. And you're like, okay, let's figure out what's going on because the labs show me nothing, right? Um, and so, from an Ayurvedic perspective, really what that came down to was that I was not living in harmony with the world around me. I had lost touch with the world I was living in because I was just in the hospital. I was so focused on my training that I had no connection to the people that mattered to me. I had no connection to myself. I had no connection to the world outside the hospital. And that was really what the problem was in sort of a general way, sort of a blanket statement. But then when I started to really dig in, I saw that I was not eating on a normal schedule. I was not sleeping on a normal schedule. I wasn't connecting with people. I had no access to natural daylight on a regular basis, right? I would go into the hospital when it was dark outside and I'd come out of the hospital when it was dark outside, right? So my entire circadian rhythm was completely out of whack, right? We know that that controls everything in our body. So I think it was just this realization that all of these small daily habits that are so important in life, in the way that we live, those were not being done by me. I was just so out of sync with everything that was sort of where I started reading and doing the research. And I was like, oh, this is what the problem is. And that sort of, put me down a rabbit hole of let me look at the wisdom that was in this medicine I grew up with.
Yes. Oh, as you were sharing that, I got some chills because I can relate definitely to that experience coming out of training. And I remember specifically one day finally just being able to sit outside among the trees. And it was so restorative and being like, wow, I've missed this for way too many years. And realizing, just feeling you can't deny the power that being in nature has. Um, And I loved in your book, I'd love if you would share a little bit about the Schumann resonance, because I had heard about it before, but I did not realize the impact that it could have on our health and on our symptoms.
Right. So the Schumann resonance is this wavelength of frequency that basically exists in the natural world. And there have been studies that have been done, and this is how they kind of discovered is that when you put a bunch of people into a bunker, under the ground, and you basically block off their ability to hear or to vibrate with the Schumann resonance, they actually have all kinds of health issues. And when you turn that resonance back on and you put like a loudspeaker, what they did in this study is they put the loudspeaker back into that bunker with the resonance, people started feeling better. So when the resonance was gone in that bunker, they had all kinds of health issues, and it happened within a few days and weeks that they started to feel low energy, they had low concentration, they just felt horrible. And as soon as you added that natural resonance of the earth, it's almost like the earth's heartbeat. When you add that back into that bunker, suddenly everyone started to feel better. Right. And so it's this proof that we are actually connected to the world we live in. We're connected to nature. And when we are disconnected, we will have health issues. There's a perfect example that Schumann resonance shows us that.
It was mind blowing to think about, going from, and I think you said it matches the alpha frequency of our brains when we're in an alpha state. And when you're in the patients in that bunker, the subjects in that bunker were experiencing, like you said, all kinds of health problems, anxiety, headaches, just poor concentration. And then just that frequency, like nothing else about seeing trees or sun or anything, but just that frequency was able to improve their symptoms, which is remarkable.
Exactly. And so it just goes back to this idea that, we are connected to the world around us. I think, so much of what happens in Western culture and Western medicine is that I don't know how this happens to us in our training, is that suddenly we think that our heads are not connected to our bodies, right? And we lose sight of that in the training when of course we're connected. And we also lose sight of the fact that we are connected to other people and connected to nature and the medicine that is in that connection. And we're just starting to, I think, many of us who are in integrative medicine are starting to be able to really spread this sort of idea of how important that is for our health. And people are starting to listen. But I will say 17 years ago, when I started doing this work, people were like, you're out to lunch. You are cuckoo for Cocoa
What are
Puffs."
you talking about?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, good for you for persevering and not letting that discourage you, because I think it is so important. And I think the point you made too about Western medicine sort of disconnects us, and Western medicine also doesn't really incorporate the idea that we have an energetic component to our system. It's often, aside from the heartbeat and the EEG on your brain, it's very focused on biochemistry and the physical body. But yet, the Schumann frequency is a great example of how we are all energetic beings in the middle of an energetic world, and that impacts our health too.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you think about it, so many of the treatments that we do in Western medicine are based on energy, ultrasound, right? I mean, X-ray, like we have these healing treatment modalities that are based on energy, yet in the medicine that we are learning and that we are giving to people, we are not actually looking at it that way. We're not seeing the medicine of the energy that we're actually, using. So it's this weird discombobulation that we have of like a disconnect between what we do and what we say to patients.
Yes. And I love how you're bringing it all together, and that's really beautiful. Can you share, so once you made this realization when you're, in your training, what were some of the changes that you made just to start that helped shift you back into balance?
The biggest thing is that I became aware. That was the first piece. And I always tell patients that is really where you need to start if you want to live an Ayurvedic lifestyle, is you have to become aware of the things that you're doing and the things that you're not doing. Right. And so I think that was the first place I started, was just becoming aware of the fact that I was eating food out of the pockets of my white coat, or that I was not seeing any natural sunlight for 13 hours a day, 15 hours a day while I was in the hospital. Just becoming aware that those things were not happening was actually the first step, because it started to make me conscious of that. And it also helped me start taking a moment to say, okay, I am eating out of my pockets, all this processed food that I'm getting in the vending machine. How about if I take 5 minutes and actually go to the cafeteria and sit down at a table and eat for 10 minutes, right? That habit change came from an awareness, right? Because sometimes for us to tell ourselves, like, oh, I got to go sit down for 15 minutes and have lunch, we can make a list of all these things we want to do. And it never happens because it's another thing on the list. But when you become aware and you're like, oh, yeah, I haven't sat down all day to eat. Let me sit down and eat. That's sort of where I started. So awareness was the first step. And then I really tried to do simple things, right? And so really trying to regulate when I was waking up, when I was going to sleep, as much as possible when I wasn't on call. Making sure that I was trying to eat something at a regular time of the day, whether it was even having, coffee and a piece of toast at the same time every day and having like a little sandwich at the same time of day, whatever I could do. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the perfect meals because I was in the hospital. I just tried to regulate things. So that was the second thing I think I did. I became aware. I tried to regulate things. And the third thing is I really went back to basics of like just breathing.
Yes.
When the stress and anxiety was high, I would take a moment to compose myself, take a breath, right? Sit down and just close my eyes and visualize sort of, okay, I'm ready to take the next shift of, patients coming in, or, taking a breath before I would walk into the next patient room, or, pull back the curtain in the ER, right? Things like that to help start shifting my nervous system into a relaxation response. Those were small things I started with. Nothing big, nothing, like lightning bolts, nothing that was like so spectacular or hard, because I knew that if I wanted to really help myself, I had to do things that were going to be easy for me to do in this crazy lifestyle I had.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes we underestimate how powerful even those simple things can be. I think without the knowledge and the awareness, like you said, we think, oh, well, if I eat at this time or this time, is it going to make a difference? But that habit over a long period of time, it might.
Yeah, exactly. I think, part of it is the realization that we tend to make things a lot more complicated than they need to be. Now, that's not to say that Ayurveda isn't a complex science. It's a very complex, deep science. And also, we can do things that are very simple that we've been doing for 5,000 years that actually we have all the data to prove works, right? And so I really want to help people understand that it's these simple habits that feel like they're going to be insignificant that are actually the most powerful things you can do on a daily basis, right? And that's where I started. That's really where I started.
That's amazing. Would you mind to back up and just give us a little overview of Ayurveda in general? You said it's a 5,000-year-old practice. What does it mean? What is the overarching philosophy?
Yeah, absolutely. So if I was to sort of sum up Ayurveda into its general, like the simple essence, it is the idea that when we live in harmony with nature, we will have optimal health and a vibrant life. Full stop, right? That's really what it's about, is living with this conscious awareness and living in harmony with the world that we live in, with nature specifically. Um, it's based on this idea that there are 5 elements in the universe: air, space, fire, water, and earth. And that everything in the universe, including human beings, is made of a different combination of those 5 elements. And those 5 elements then combine to make something called 3 doshas, or mind body constitutions, or energies. And basically, your dosha is the genetic blueprint that you were born with. That is your natural state of balance. Okay. And basically, the only time you're in that natural state of balance is when you're born and when you die. Every other point of, that you are alive, you are going in and out of that natural state of balance. And Ayurveda is the practice of course correction, of trying to stay close to that natural state of balance that you were born with. So the way that you do that is you become aware and you start to synchronize with the world that you live around, that you live in. That's really what it comes down to. And that's how Ayurveda works. And so everything that we do in Ayurveda is really around this idea of how can you stay close to your natural state of balance, not anybody else's, but your natural state of balance. And how do you know when you're out of balance? When you have symptoms. Symptoms are information, right? We are so afraid of symptoms. And of course, it's uncomfortable. It's discomfort. It's not fun, right? But if we could try to start to look at symptoms as information that our body is giving us, that something's not right, and become aware of that and try to look for some patterns and try and address it when it's really small, right? It's going to help you in the long run. That's what Ayurveda is about.
Amazing. It makes so much sense, right? But that's really beautiful. Well, so you start to move into some of these habits, the small habits at first. And then I know in your book, you also discussed you were having these dreams about your grandfather kind of coming to you and encouraging you. And at some point, you decided to really embrace this as not just for your own personal, but to really share it with patients and make a career shift. Can you share how that happened?
Yeah, it was this sort of slow progression towards it. And it really started in my medical training when I wasn't feeling well. And I was like, okay, what's going on? And I looked for answers in the medicine I grew up with, right? And I started to see Ayurveda everywhere, quite literally. When I was learning about anything, I was like, oh, that's Ayurveda, that's Ayurveda. And, once you see Ayurveda, you can't unsee it, really. And as I did more and more research, I saw all the physiology, all the research, all the studies that actually proved the physiology behind what we had been doing for 5,000 years. And I was like, oh, this makes sense to me. This is how I want to practice medicine. And that's really what started happening. And my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, lived a very Ayurvedic lifestyle. He lived until he was 89. He had not a single medical issue. He had never taken a single medication. He died because he fell a year before his death while he was on his morning walk of 5 kilometers or whatever, 10 kilometers. He fell and broke his hip. And that was sort of the beginning of the end. We know this story. It's a common one. Um, and he sort of was like, yeah, I'm ready to go. And after he passed away, I was in my training and he just kept coming to my dreams of like, this is what you're supposed to do. This is what you're supposed to do. This is why you went to medical school, is to be able to bring your medical knowledge from a Western point of view with the medicine that you grew up with and bring those together and help people understand how powerful it is. And so it's just, one thing happened after the other. I started practicing. I started getting, advanced training. I then started to see patients. Word of mouth. I started teaching. I was at, Northwestern for a while, doing some teaching, speaking, wrote one book, wrote another book. Like it just all happened because I wanted to share what I had learned and what I had experienced. And it really resonated with a lot of people.
That is amazing. And I can so relate to that experience of once you see something, you can't unsee it. And it had to be so almost comical for you to see this science coming out where people being like, oh, the microbiome is so important. And you're like, well, yeah, I knew that. Or, your circadian rhythm is so important. I think you shared the Nobel Prize in 2017 was on circadian rhythms and impact on health. And you said this has been known for 5,000 years, but science is now catching up to some of this ancient wisdom. And it allows you to then really communicate the power of these, to people in the Western system that otherwise might not be open to it.
Yeah, because the Western mind wants to know why, right? We want the proof. That's just how we work. And so I really try to meet people where they are because there is so much medicine in Ayurveda that a lot of people would sort of discount before and say it's woo-woo, it's not real, it's like, oh, whatever. But no, there's real science that proves what we've been doing, these practices, these habits that we've really sort of lived in Ayurveda actually are the things that move the needle, because there's science behind why it works, how it changes your physiology, how it controls hormones, right? We know that these are the practices that do that. And so I think that that's been the most incredible thing about it, is that when I can actually talk about the science with people, suddenly they sit up a little more and they lean in and they're willing to hear, because they say, oh, there's proof in this, and it doesn't seem so wacky or so out there for them.
Yeah, absolutely. That's amazing. And I think for me, so I hadn't been exposed to Ayurveda early, but I had been exposed to, well, doing CrossFit, I was exposed to the importance of our lifestyle. And then when I was in medical school, I was exposed to functional medicine, and the concept of root causes and looking at the body as a system was something that was my light bulb moment of, okay, now medicine looks different to me. I can't unsee this. And so I think that informed a lot of, my personal habits and also my approach with patients through medical school and residency. But then, life has a way of kind of taking you a level deeper, right? At the right time. And for me, that came right after residency, where I had a big realizing, okay, even if I optimize all of my lifestyle and my fitness and, my sleep and all these markers, there's actually a layer deeper, which is our emotional health and our hearts and how we're processing emotions that I had not addressed. And that was a big wake up call for me. But I would love for you to share a bit more of your story around your breast cancer diagnosis and how that took you a layer deeper into your practice.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to say that's exactly what happened to me with the breast cancer diagnosis. I mean, I think that doing this work, you start to meet people, talk to people, do research, and you're like, oh, yes, our heads are connected to our bodies. And so what we're feeling and thinking is actually affecting our health, right? So there was always that understanding, and I'm really good at telling people that. But it wasn't until the breast cancer diagnosis that I really understood. I was writing my second book, The Longevity Formula. And really, that was inspired by me, hitting my 50th birthday. I'm 54 now. And it was sort of like, okay, what does my next era look like, right? Thank you, Taylor Swift. Like, what's my next era look like? I had just launched my second child off to college, and it was like, okay, where's my work going? What's my personal life going to be look like? And what's my health going to look like? And I really started reflecting on all my elders and how my parents and my grandparents and my aunts and uncles who live an Ayurvedic lifestyle are living into their 70s, 80s, and 90s with beautiful health, where they are fully functional. They can live independently. They think really clearly. They're connected to their communities. Like, how did they do that? Right? I knew the answer was Ayurveda. But I was like, again, I wanted to dig deeper into the science beyond just the mechanisms. But what is it about our Ayurvedic practices that links it to longevity, right? And to longevity medicine? And that took me down a whole, rabbit hole. And next thing I know, I'm writing a book. And of course, 4 months into writing the book, I get a diagnosis of breast cancer out of nowhere. I have no family history. I have no genetic disposition. And I really was on my knees. I will tell you, I was wrapped up in a small ball on the floor in tears, thinking, are you kidding me? I have spent my life taking care of people in my family, my role in my family, my role as a physician. This is the work I've been doing. I've taught thousands of people about Ayurveda, and here I am. I now have a breast cancer diagnosis, and I do these practices every day. Like, what is happening, right? And long story short, I decided to do all of the conventional Western medical treatment, but I also integrated it, because I'm truly integrative, with all of the practices I had already been doing. So I had an integrative oncologist along with my regular oncologist. I had an acupuncturist. I had an energy healer. I had the breast surgeon. Like, I had everybody on my healing team. So I really took an integrated approach. And what I realized was that there were a lot of emotions that I had never processed. And this was sort of the big learning, is that, I suddenly was surrounded by people who were coming out of the woodwork from every aspect of my life, showing up for me and pouring into me in a way that I had never expected or experienced in my entire life, because I was so used to being the healer, the caregiver, right? As for my patients, for my family, for my friends, and suddenly they were pouring into me. Now, here's what happened for me is that I really understood for the first time in my life that I needed to learn how to receive, right? I needed to learn that. It was a very emotional time for me of having that realization that if I was going to get through this, that really the lesson here for me was to learn how to receive from others, how to be open to that love and that empathy and that giving that comes from other people. And so that emotional piece was sort of a light bulb moment for me in my healing journey. And it also allowed me to sort of still integrate, both worlds. I think that because of that understanding, I got through all my treatments even faster. I also think it was because of Ayurveda. Ayurveda, from my perspective, is protective of your health. It's not necessarily going to mean that you're not going to get cancer. I'm the poster child for that, right? But it will protect you because I was able to get through my training. I'm saying I was able to get through my treatment in exactly 7 months, from the day I was diagnosed till the day I took my last radiation treatment was exactly 7 months. And I had a very intensive course of treatment because I was quite young, very healthy. They were going for quote cure, right? My healing team. And so I had 8 very intensive chemotherapy treatments, 2 weeks apart. I had a bilateral mastectomy 4 weeks after I finished my last chemotherapy. And exactly 4 weeks later, I had 15 rounds of radiation treatment. And I bounced back from every treatment really, really well. And I know it's because of Ayurveda, because it protected me so that when the hit the fan, right, I was able to bounce back and actually get through it much better. So for me, it was very emotional. And I think I tuned into that really quickly, that so many of the things that we feel like we can't explain. And for me, it was like breast cancer. Where did this come from? Oh, it's the emotional piece that was part of the issue for me.
Yes, absolutely. I think my unlocking was very similar. It was in asking for help, which was not something that I had been accustomed to doing, and that was what really unlocked, I think, a lot of the emotional uh, exploration and healing for me. So I can
Yeah. And,
relate to
and for me, it was asking for help and then being able to receive it, not just asking for it, because I was pretty good by then, like learning how to ask for help, but actually receiving it. That was the big difference.
it can be uncomfortable if you're not used to it.
Very,
Yes.
very.
And can lead you to, I think you mentioned this in the book too, to really re-examine some of the subconscious beliefs that we all create in childhood about not being worthy of, love or help, or not being good enough. And I think in healing those, there's so much freedom as well.
Yeah, there is. It's interesting when you're willing to sit with the questions and keep asking yourself the question, okay, but what? But what else? But what else? Or but why is that? Sort of like going through that sort of peeling back the onion sort of exercise. You'll get to sort of that core belief that's underneath that affects every aspect of your health. And for me, it was, oh, I'm alone in the world, which was a belief I held from a very young age. And I realized that that was affecting my health in ways that you can't see until it knocks you on your knees and you get some kind of a diagnosis. And even for someone like me who had been practicing all of these things that I teach in Ayurveda, things that I know have supported my health, there was one thing that I hadn't addressed, which was that false belief that was underneath everything. And so I really think that the breast cancer, again, symptoms are information. I feel like it came up for me to learn that that was something I needed to really unlock and deal with.
That's beautiful. And now I think, like most hard things in life, right? When you're further removed from it and you can look back, you can see the lessons and the reasons. But when you're in that moment, like you said, curled up with the first diagnosis, there's so much probably anger and frustration and confusion. But I can see now, if you had never had that diagnosis, or if you hadn't pursued both Western and Ayurvedic care, you wouldn't have learned. There's something about going through the experience yourself that you can never learn intellectually. It's a very different experience to be able to then share that with other people.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So can you explain a little bit how Ayurveda thinks about emotions? I know you write about moving prana, different, energy, whether it's breath or muscles or emotions, but how do we think about this, and what are some practices that people can do to start doing this kind of work?
Yeah. So, it really comes down to digestion, right? And we know about this in Western medicine, the gut brain, all of these things, right? The way that we look at emotions is that they need to be digested and processed, right? Everything that comes into our aura or auric field, right? All of the sensory inputs that we have coming in all day long, right? They're causing reactions in our bodies. And our bodies we have to do something with those emotions, right? They either are going to get stored inside of us, right? And then cause all kinds of problems, or we're going to process them, digest them, keep what we need and get rid of the rest, right? And so in Ayurveda, the digestion, the Agni, the digestive fire, is key to our health. Again, we knew 5,000 years ago that the digestive capacity of the body, of the digestion, the gut, is the seat of health, which we now know, the gut brain, and we know how important the gut is for our health and how connected it is to everything else in our body from a Western standpoint. From the Eastern standpoint, right? Your digestive capacity is your ability. How good is your ability to take in all of this stuff from the world, whether it's food or it's emotions or experiences or sensory inputs? How good can your digestion take that all in, your system take that in, process it, keep what it needs, and get rid of the rest? If you have a healthy, strong digestive fire, you'll do that really well. And if you don't, you won't do so well. And you'll actually accumulate toxins in the body, which then cause all kinds of problems. So the digestive fire is sort of a metaphor, right? For this idea of you have to do something with all this stuff that's coming in. And when you can't, it will cause problems. It's the same thing with emotions. So from the Ayurvedic perspective, you have these emotions, you have these experiences that cause these emotions, that trigger emotions. You had a fight with your partner. You had a disagreement with a boss. Let's just use those, right? Causes some kind of reaction and emotions. Those are inside of you. Okay, so now what is your capacity to deal with it? Or are you going to just store it? Because if you store it for long enough, it will cause problems and you will find yourself on your knees on the floor at some point. If you are able to process those emotions and just keep sort of the learning from that and not hold on to the emotion and store it in your body and eliminate it instead, that's when you have those lessons, the learnings, and you can actually move forward with better health, right? So again, it's a metaphor. From the perspective of what you can do, again, it starts with awareness. Become aware of the fact that you feel really angry, that you feel really sad, that you feel really joyful, whatever it is, become aware, right? Don't live comfortably numb where it's like, yeah, I don't even notice what emotions I'm having.
Right.
Right.
Right. Which was me for a very long time.
And me as well.
And you look at, I think it's always helpful to look at children, right? Like they just express their emotions so freely. And then you have to ask the question, where did I go from that to where I am now? And how can I get back to more of, maybe not screaming and crying in the middle of the grocery store, but at least allowing the emotions to come up.
Exactly. Getting in your car and screaming and crying and, or screaming into a pillow. These are all actually things that allow us to actually move that energy, move that prana, move that emotion through our system so that we can actually move forward with better health. We're not just storing everything.
Yes. Which is hard. The world often tells us that that's not acceptable or that's not appropriate. And so there's a lot of unlearning that needs to happen, I think, for many of us.
For sure. For sure. Absolutely.
Amazing. Well, I'd love to talk about some other practices. So you mentioned just this concept of digestion, taking in all of these things from the world, and there's a lot of toxins that build up. So could you talk a little bit about other ways that we remove toxins besides the emotional expression?
Yeah. I mean, and I talk a lot about this in the book, in the longevity formula, my new book. And I talk about one of the longevity switches for the longevity formula, right? So let me back up. The longevity formula really came out of this idea that we can live longer if we do two things. If we increase cellular repair and if we decrease inflammation. The combination of those two things will help us to live longer. And from an Ayurvedic standpoint, when we do those things, we're actually nourishing the tissue layers or the dhatus in the body. Okay. When you have nourished tissues, you actually will live longer. That's from an Ayurvedic perspective. The way you do that, increase cellular repair, decrease inflammation. All of the practices we've done in Ayurveda, we know scientifically do at least one of those things. Okay. And there are 5 sort of switches, longevity switches that I've kind of grouped these practices into that really move the needle. And one of them is to remove toxins. That's the first longevity switch. And so I also talk about a couple of different ways you can do that. Toxins, again, are metaphorical, but they're also real, right? And so it's actually, there are different practices, whether it's removing toxins from the senses every morning, right? Through tongue scraping, through neti pot, through dry brushing. I talk about all of those practices in the book. Those are all things that are actually removing physical toxins that have accumulated overnight. Our body is trying to get rid of that naturally. Let's help our body out. And in the morning, remove those toxins through these practices. So that's one way, right? Another way we've already talked about is actually becoming aware of your emotions, right? And learning to process and really release the emotions that you don't need. And that is a daily practice, right? That is a sort of check-in, simple things like whether it's a gratitude journal or even just a few minutes every evening reviewing your day and thinking about everything that happened. And if something happened that caused some emotions, maybe just thinking through like, how did I feel about that? What am I feeling about that? Am I going to store it or am I going to let go of it? Just again, becoming aware. This isn't like it's some big, process you have to go through. It's just a commitment to a practice,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So that's another way. Another thing that you can do for removing toxins is actually very simple. Having some warm water with lime or lemon in it in the morning, that actually is like an internal flush. It helps us actually have a bowel movement in the morning. Emptying our bowels first thing in the morning is really important to remove toxins that have accumulated. It's very simple, right?
Simple but powerful. And I will say I've incorporated some of these over the last month or two, the tongue scraping, oil pulling, the lemon water in the morning instead of jumping right into coffee. And you notice a difference. So you're right. It's small things, but especially doing several of them together over a period of time,
Right.
They're powerful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we remove toxins. I know you touch on so many other aspects, and I want people to check out the longevity solution and read it for yourself. But anything else that you would want to highlight as far as practices? I know we talked a lot about kind of living in harmony with nature, the rhythms, whether it's when you're eating, sleeping, sunlight, circadian rhythm, um, movement, obviously is another one. But anything else that you want to highlight here?
Yeah, there's I get asked this question a lot of like, you wrote a whole book on the longevity formula. Like, where do I start? Because there's like 30 practices in this book. Where do I start? And really what I would say is that it's really simple. It's something I call the 12-12-12 framework. Okay. 3 things I'll leave your audience with. And these are really powerful, again, from the simplicity, but also from the Western standpoint of the physiology of what's going on and how it actually switches on those longevity switches. Okay. The first 12 is 12 hours of fasting overnight. And I'm sure, Julie, you talk about this with your audience all the time. You know these, but I'm just going to reiterate them. Is fast 12.
From, right?
Yeah. Fast for 12 hours overnight. Okay, start with the 12-hour fast. That means that if you finish eating at 7 p.m., you don't eat again until 7 a.m. The rule is when you should be sleeping, you should not be eating. When nature is sleeping, you should also be sleeping and not eating. That's just really what it comes down to. And that's because of autophagy, right? This cellular cleanup system we have in our bodies that also ages and gets slower as we age. And so what we've found through all the studies is that the most powerful stimulant of autophagy is fasting, right? There was a study that was done with 1,957 patients, very specific, over 4.4 years. And what they found is that those who fasted daily actually had a 45% lower mortality rate than those who didn't. Fasting is powerful.
And that's 12 hours. That's
12 hours. Yeah. Just starting with 12 hours. I mean, in the study, it was probably more about 14 to 16. But my point in saying 12 is that if you've never fasted before, become aware and just do it for 12 hours and then increase to 14 to 16 hours. That's about the sweet spot. A lot of us talk about this, like what's best for women versus men. 14 to 16 is about the sweet spot for most women because beyond that, then you're putting yourself into a very big stress response. It's not just hormesis, which is good stress. It's actually bad stress over a long period of time if you're doing it every day. So it's best to stay in that 14 to 16 hour sort of window. So that's the first thing. 12 hours of fasting, that will increase your longevity. Okay. The second thing is 12 minutes of morning sunlight. And you already mentioned this, so I know you talk about this, the morning sun viewing, right? Again, get out into natural sunlight as early as you can in the day, definitely before 10 o'clock in the morning. Stay out for 12 minutes. It'd be better if it was like 15 or 20 more minutes, right?
Once you're out there, you might enjoy it and stay out.
Exactly. And go for a walk and get some prana, and you've got you're doing double the practices, right? Double the benefits. But it's really about getting natural sunlight into your eyes, right? So that your brain actually registers, oh, it's daytime. It turns on the cortisol. It turns off the melatonin, right? So you have better energy, you have better focus, concentration, all of those things. But what you're doing is you're resetting that circadian rhythm every morning by getting that natural sunlight. And again, we know circadian rhythm is so important because cortisol and melatonin are sort of the master hormones, and they control everything downstream. And so it's really important to make sure those are regulated. And the easiest way is get some sunlight in the morning.
What do you tell people when they ask about, is it okay to have sunlight through a window? Or what if they wake up before the sun rises?
Yeah. If you wake up before the sun rises, turn some lights on and get outside as soon as you can, right? But it'll actually start to, your brain will start to register that it's daylight. Through a window is not good. Usually windows have some kind of protective coating on them, just like sunglasses. So you want to try and get natural sunlight. If the only way is that you can get sunlight is through a window, get as close to the window as you can and stay there longer. But really getting that sunlight into your eyes is the most important.
Amazing. Okay. So we've got the fasting. Shoot, I forgot the first 12. There's fasting.
12 hours of fasting, 12 minutes of morning sun viewing. And then the last 12 in that 12-12-12 framework is 12 minutes of breath work and meditation. All right. We know that shifting into a parasympathetic response is so incredibly important for our health, because a stress response is the main cause of inflammation, and inflammation is linked to every chronic illness and every problem of aging. Okay. So what we're trying to do is to retrain our bodies to actually learn how to go from a stress response into a parasympathetic or relaxed state. And meditation and breath work are two of the most powerful ways that we can do that. Okay. We know there have been so many studies that show that, people who have a higher allostatic load or stress response, accumulated stress, actually have higher risk of cancer, actually almost a 28% higher risk of cancer, and also have more than 2 times the risk of Alzheimer's. All right. So stress is related to all of these issues, these chronic issues. And so really learning how to modulate your stress is really important. Meditation and breath work are the simplest ways. They're easy, they're free, They're simple. You can do them anywhere, right? I always tell people use these phones that we have, right? That we carry everywhere with us. Set an alarm on the phone 3 times a day as a breath break or as a meditation break, and just sit in stillness and breathe for 3 minutes. Let your body just come back into balance, to shift from that state into a relaxation state. And, name your alarm breath break or something like that. Make your exhale longer than your inhale. That will actually shift you into that response. And so these are the three things: 12, 12, 12, 12 hours of fasting, 12 minutes of morning sunlight, 12 minutes of breath work and meditation. Do those. Super powerful.
So
Super.
powerful. And as you were explaining the morning practices, I thought, what a difference between rolling over and looking at your phone or email or social media versus 24 minutes to get some sunlight, a walk, and some fresh air, and then breath work or meditation. That seems like, something that I hope most people can do if we really think about it and plan for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's always important to also give yourself grace and start with a quick win, right? Like, I'm big into this. Like, let's do the thing that's going to be a quick win so we can build on that success. So whatever of these 3 suggestions I gave you would be easiest for you to implement, start with that one, right? And build it into your day. And then when you have success with that one, add on the next one, right? Really important.
Start with one small step at a time.
Yeah, absolutely.
What does your now daily routine or daily practices look like? And I imagine you said you have some grace for yourself. You don't do everything every day, but how do you live your life on a daily basis now?
Yeah, I really try to start my mornings by checking in with myself, becoming aware. How am I feeling today? How does my body feel? Am I having pain? Am I having any discomfort? How does my heart feel? How have I been processing the emotions? Am I feeling really upset about something? Am I feeling excited about something? Right? Just checking in with myself and then asking myself, what do I need? Right? Those are 3 simple questions. Like, how do I feel? What do I need? Right? That's really where I start. And then I really try to do the practices that are going to help with that are going to address that. And so, I honestly always tell my patients, and I do this for myself, I have a list on my phone because in the moment, sometimes it's hard to remember what you could do. And so I have a self-care list of like, these are some things that I know that will help me if I'm feeling upset, if I'm not feeling well. I'll even list for myself, even though I teach this every day, get outside for a walk, Avanti. Sit down and breathe. Make a nice cup of tea. Call a friend. All of these practices are important.
That's amazing. I have a similar list of self-care practices, and it is funny how sometimes you forget, right? Or when you're in the moment where you're really, upset about something, you forget, oh, I just need to go outside for a walk, and it's going to shift things for me. So I love that you use that note.
Yeah, I really just try to do that. I start with, how do I feel? And then I have my morning routine. I make sure I remove the toxins. Again, I'm really pretty regimented about trying to do things at the same time every day because I know circadian rhythm is so important. And it really helps my nervous system anticipate what's coming, right? And so when you eat at the same times and try to work in the same blocks and go for, exercise at the same time, your nervous system knows what to expect. And so it can downregulate. So that's a really great way to regulate your nervous system. So that's something I do too. And then I always make sure I try and get to bed on time. That's really important. I know I sound like probably a broken record, like you do too, probably like always talking about sleep, but it is so important. And so really making sure that I have good sleep hygiene and just really that is a commitment I have, is getting sleep and getting to sleep on this at the same time every day.
Amazing. I love it. Towards the end of the book, you talk a little bit about feeding the soul and some of the things we talked about earlier with, connecting to your purpose, which is so beautiful and apparent to see how you are living that out and you've listened to your inner voice along the way to guide you, connecting with people, which I know, I could relate to what you shared in medical school and residency of not having as much of that connection and it really being hard, and then connection with the divine. So can you highlight a little bit about why these things are so important for our health?
Yeah, I shared a little bit about that. Thank you for asking this because it's really important to me. It's actually not a section I was planning on writing in the book. And I ended up writing it, and it actually ended up being probably the most important part of the book for me. And I think it was out of this learning through that breast cancer journey of how important connection is, and how important it was for me in my healing journey through breast cancer. I mean, I knew that, right? I've read all the studies and would talk about it with my patients, but it became very personal for me. And I think what I realized is that what helped me get through each day through that journey was understanding how much I needed to connect. And it comes back to sort of that idea of learning to receive, right? It was all connected for me. And I realized that connecting to other people who wanted to help me, who wanted to pour love into me, that was really important. And that was how I was going to get through things. That was the medicine I needed. And so I really made a commitment to myself to try and connect in some way every day, whether it was connecting with myself of just saying, how are you feeling today? And processing those emotions, connecting to another person or connecting to the world, right, around me, even sitting out on my patio most days with chemotherapy, I couldn't do much. I would sit on my patio and just connect with nature in some way, get some natural sunlight in my eyes. But then connecting with the divine, that was or connecting with something larger than myself. So it could be nature, universe, whatever you want to call it. But it helped me realize that I wasn't alone in the world and that there's so much more, that there's something much bigger out there than me. And so I think just always coming back to that connection of some kind really helped fuel me, helped me get through everything that I went through. And I think it's just important for all of us. We forget how much how much connection can really heal us and is so important for us.
So important. And at the end of the day, that's really the most important thing we take with us, in life. So that's amazing. Well, I'd love to finish with 3 questions I ask everyone at the end of the podcast, and then talk about some of the exciting new things that you're working on and where people can find you. So the first question is, what are the 3 things, and we might have covered this already, the 3 things that you do on a regular basis that have the biggest positive impact on your health?
So I think it would be that check-in in the morning of how am I feeling? What do I need? I think the second one is getting outside and getting some sunlight in the morning. Because again, it's a way for me to, reset my circadian rhythm. Great. But it really is a way for me to get some prana moving in me and to connect with the natural world. So that's really important to me.
And as you were saying that, I thought, Chicago, that must be hard in the winter time.
It
I'm from
is. It's a
Michigan,
challenge.
so
It's a real challenge, but I force myself. There's a joke we have that, there is no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothing. So
that's
I have a
very,
lot of coats and
very
hats.
Midwest mentality. Yes.
Exactly, exactly. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing is definitely connecting. I always make it a priority. I actually write it down on my list of things to do of like connection. So whether that's sitting down and having a moment of prayer or silence for myself, or it's making a phone call to my sister, or it's just connecting with my own emotions, I really make sure I connect once a day.
Amazing. What is one thing that you think would have an impact on your health, but you have a hard time implementing it, or something you're working on?
I think probably movement for me right now, coming out of breast cancer and chemotherapy. I think it's been a long road back because you don't realize how much muscle atrophy you have just after 7 months of not being able to move around a lot through treatment. And so it's been a very long process for me to get back, um, especially because I'm still technically in treatment. And so I have to take, a hormone blocker every day for estrogen because I had an estrogen positive tumor. So it's hard to get back into movement. So I would say very long-winded answer, but movement is the hardest thing for me right now because I have pain and I'm have low energy. So that I know is something I'm just continually working on.
Yes. And having patience with yourself, right? It's a different phase and season of life. All right. Last question is, what does a healthy life look like to you?
A healthy life for me is about waking up every day feeling like I have a sense of purpose of why I'm here and what I'm meant to do. And so that's, for me, a really healthy life.
Amazing. Well, it's great to see you living that purpose and bringing that out into the world. And I'm so glad to have found your work. Where can people learn more about what you're doing? I know you have a new venture that you just launched called Arvasi. Maybe you can talk about that and where people can find the rest of your work.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Yeah, you can find me. My website is AvantiKumarsingh.com is my full name. I'm on Instagram. I have my books and my podcast, The Healing Catalyst. Those are all great things. And you can find that all through my website. I have also started a new business called Arvasi, and it just actually launched this week, which is super exciting. It's an Ayurvedic prescription, a seasonal prescription, in which we deliver a seasonal box 4 times a year with full guidance on how to live an Ayurvedic lifestyle. And it's really about personalized medicine. And it's really personalizing these products and this education towards your dosha, specifically to what you need each season. And you can check that out at myarvasi.com. Really, really fascinating. And it's been so much fun putting together, and people are so excited because it's very personalized. And that's what people are looking for, is personalized solutions for their health issues. So I'm hoping that this is a way to help people get started on that journey.
And I love the seasonality of it too, and giving people, I think sometimes when we look at health habits or changing things, it seems daunting. And then if we break it into, okay, I'm going to do this or focus on this during this season or something else, it makes it a little bit more doable and exciting and fun.
Yeah, exactly. And it goes back to that idea of living in harmony with nature, right? And so you have to change things a little bit throughout the year so you can live in better harmony with nature. So
amazing. Well, thank you so much. This has been such a wonderful conversation. I'm so glad that we could sit down and chat. And I hope people will check out your books, your work, your courses, get their box, and hopefully we'll talk to you again at some point.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Julie.
Thanks so much for tuning in. If you enjoy listening to the podcast, please consider subscribing and giving it a 5-star rating on iTunes. It really does help to get the word out to more people.